All right. Hello and welcome back to this is episode 3 of our series of When Good People Go Toxic and how workplace stress becomes ugly or uglier. If you want to say that was workplace stress is ugly. Um, so tonight we're going to talk about how it becomes more normalized and how it becomes part of our everyday life when you're in those environments that are toxic and bullying. And before we get started, I think one of the most important things to know, especially about workplace bullying, but that when we talk about workplace bullying, generally the conversation is around the people who it involves, i.e., the bully or the person being bullied. Or if there's more than one bully, there can often be more than one person who is being bullied. And the conversation around what the issue is and who the problem is focuses around those people. Okay? And again, remember, you can have more than one bully. You can have more than one person in your work environment who's bullied. And when we limit the conversation around just those people, that's when it becomes extremely problematic and the interventions we use don't work. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And so the first thing you have to do is expand your definition and your understanding of who's involved in workplace bullying. And it's the entire organization. Everyone is affected. And one of the things that we do is we want it to be interpersonal conflict where maybe I have an issue with you or you have an issue with me, and it just is between the two of us. And bullying is not an interpersonal conflict issue. It is a cultural issue, a team issue, right? So I worked in several universities, and some of those did in fact rare though it might have been, did have some functional departments. But a large majority of the universities that I worked in were pretty dysfunctional and were uh, engrossed in bully culture. And so, but how does it become that way? That's the big question. And like I've said before, we do need more research. Many of us, myself included, was dropped into workplace bullying in which the organizational culture was already extremely toxic by the time I got there. And it was just in what I refer to as the self-sustaining mode of organizational toxicity and bullying. And so we have to expand our definition from looking at it as an interpersonal conflict issue. It's not. And we have to start encompassing more people into the conversation when it comes to workplace bullying. And when we do that, it helps us understand why things like bullying become normalized and part of everyday work. So let's talk about who is involved in bullying, right? There are roles, ROLES, roles that people have in bully culture. And these roles they're flexible. They move, okay? They're not in stone. So for example, of course we have our perpetrator of abuse and our bully. And that's the person who is the most aggressive person in the workplace. Now, let me just again put some caveats on that. When I say most aggressive, that doesn't mean that that person is yelling and screaming. It means that you can have a primary aggressor who is the major puppet master, who's pulling sort of the strings via gaslighting and manipulation behind the scenes, and they're the ones who are orchestrating bully culture and bullying. And you can have you can have more than one primary aggressor, but generally there is, one or two people who are the major perpetrators of the abuse. Again, not necessarily the ones who are in your face, but who are the ones behind the scenes pulling the strings. Then you can also have people I refer to as secondary aggressors, who again are pretty abusive, but still take orders, so to speak, from that primary aggressor. Okay, so depending on how big your organization is, how big your team is, depends on how many aggressors are in your environment. And so that's one role. The bully or the aggressor, the perpetrator, is a role in bully culture. And that role will always be filled. Okay, somebody will always be in that position. You, of course, always have a person, a recipient of bullying. And that is that also is not written in stone. That role is flexible as well, and you can have more than one person. You can have a primary victim or a secondary victim, depending on your organizational culture. Then you also have everybody else. According to my theory of workplace bullying, everyone else is a bystander. If you're in a leadership role, if you're in in human resources, it doesn't make any difference. Whatever the other positions are, you are either a recipient of bullying, you're either the bully or the aggressor, or you're a bystander. Those are the roles that we have. And bystanders are often the people who get overlooked. They're often seen as neutral. They're seen as the ones that can save the organization, when in fact they are oftentimes more problematic than in fact maybe the bully is. Okay, and because the bully is manipulating them, a lot of times what ends up happening is the people who are actually engaged in the bullying can often be bystanders, right? If you've heard me speak or talk, you know that often what happens is I refer to them as minions, for lack of a better term, because what they do is the bidding of the bully, and it can be very hurtful and very, very painful. So these might be somebody in your workplace who you might have been friends with, who suddenly then turns on you. You might have had a good relationship with this person, and suddenly they're engaging or not saying anything when it comes to workplace bullying, okay? And so why bystanders are so important, and why bullies use them, is because when you have a bystander who's bullying you, then what it looks like again is that you're in fact the problem. Everybody else, they're good. It's really you. And so bystanders are doing the bidding of the bully, and the bully can say, Jan's making all these accusations about me, but you can see that I didn't send that email. I didn't say something to Jan in the meeting. It was, so-and-so, which that kind of technique, again, is not done on a random whim. It is done on purpose so that the bully can make it seem like they're not doing anything. It's really, I'm the one who's the troublemaker. And then it allows then, if human resources, whoever gets involved, they don't know who to believe. And in fact, oftentimes they will believe the majority of the people in the work environment who are bystanders, who are covering and working with the bully, because it looks like I'm the lone wolf out there alone. Okay? And so that's where it becomes problematic. And we hear this over and over. Oh, bystanders have to speak up. Bystanders have to speak up. They're making choices not to speak up because of the dysfunctional nature of the group dynamic. So if you're in a leadership position, this is one of the things I talk in my leadership book, and I can put that link below, is that if you don't know how to manage group dynamics and see the red flags that your group dynamics are dysfunctional, that doesn't you need that skill to be a good leader. So what happens is we have a real innate nature of ourselves is to fit in and be part of the group. We would rather be part of a bully culture group and a dysfunctional bullying group than to stand up and say, hey, this is problematic. Very few people can actually stand up against the crowd and take a stand when other people are against them. Because again, what happens and how negativity and toxicity becomes normalized is that if I'm a bystander in the workplace and I speak up for you, or I say, hey, wouldn't it be great if we just didn't interrupt people at meetings? And what if we set up some, rules around how we're going to have meetings? What happens then, people see me as a threat and they come after me, right? So maybe I'm going up for promotion, or I'm going to go try to get a raise, and I stand up for, the person who's being bullied, then people come after me. And again, the puppet master, aka the bully, is not necessarily doing those things hands on. They're getting the group to do it. And so groupthink, which is a concept where people go along with things that they normally wouldn't do on their own. And what this also does, this explains why when you have a one-on-one conversation with a bystander, they will often say, yes, this place is dysfunctional, this place is terrible, there is bullying happening, and it's terrible what's happening to you. But then when you get them in a group and they have to stand up or say something, then they won't do it because their nature is to fit in with the group. They want to go along to get along. And the other thing I think too, and this is one of the things I've thought long and hard about, a lot of us, again, I don't have any time to excuse a bystander when you're an adult in the workplace and you're watching somebody be abused and you're sitting there with your head down, or you're engaging in it. I have little to no time for that kind of stuff because it's wrong, period. And we give them a pass by saying things like, oh, they're fearful. Yeah, maybe they are fearful, or I have a tendency to believe that it's not necessarily that they're fearful, because many of them, in fact, did and had spoke up at some point. But it's that they're playing the long game, right? So there's no we in team when you have bully culture. It's everybody, every person is for themselves. And so they're playing the long game. So they say, okay, Bob here is our bully. Bob is my supervisor. Jan's a person being bullied. I don't like what's happening to Jan. But did I tell you that Bob's the supervisor? Bob's the one who gives raises. Bob's the one who gives promotion. And they align themselves with Bob because they're looking down the road as to, I don't like what Bob is doing, but Bob can get me where I want to go, which is I want that promotion. I want that position. I want that raise. I want. Okay. And so I don't think it's about fear. I definitely think, yes, maybe there is some level of fear there, but I think the majority of people and bystanders in the workplace, what happens is they're just looking to get ahead, and so they go along to get along, right? And most people, again, don't have the ability to stand up in a crowd and be the lone wolf. And so what happens is then they don't say anything. And if they do, there's peer pressure in the group not to say things. So they might say to me, yeah, Bob is terrible to you, Jan. But then when Bob is yelling at me and swearing at me, again, the pressure when nobody else is saying anything is too intense for them to be able to say anything. So that pressure of being silent then becomes the norm. And so these things then you become immune to them, right? Again, last week we talked about how, the hair on the back of your neck might stand up. But again, the more your exposure to bad behavior, the more that exposure immunes you from thinking that what's happening is bad. Because everybody else believes it's normal, believes it's okay. And the other thing that happens, so there's groupthink, people go along to get along. There's pressure. People are looking for playing the long game to get ahead about what's best for them. And the other thing that's happened, and I've talked about this many times before, is that the bully isn't just bullying you in public, right? They're not just doing it when you're around. So when you're documenting, one of the things I always tell the people I'm working with when it comes to documenting, you document as much as you can, what you can see, the emails you get. But the other thing that you have to remember is that Bob is behind the scenes, and we talked a little bit about this last week, again, cultivating narratives about you that are not true. And one of the things that happens with people who are being bullied, recipients of bullying, is that when they report, Bob says, see, I told you Jan was a problem. She's always into HR telling on us. And then people start to think, Jan is in HR a lot, huh? And then Bob's back behind the scenes saying, Jan's always late. Jan's never in the office when she's supposed to be in the office. Even though I have legitimate reasons for being out of the office, maybe I have office hours somewhere else, or I'm scheduled at a different building, or I'm working remotely. Bob is back there saying, Jan's a problem. She's always late. She's never in the office. And what else Bob does is he says, look, her door is shut. Look, she's not there. And then they're like, yeah, she is there. Sorry about that. So it becomes very, very problematic. And so then they find things in the environment to confirm what Bob is saying to them. And so then soon those things that they thought weren't true, now they are true, because they are seeking things out in their environment that say, hey, Jan is the problem. And so all of these things are happening all at once. So these group dynamics are why behavior becomes normalized, why we think that it's problematic that I have my office door shut, even though there's legitimate reasons not to. There's evidence that I'm somewhere else because I'm scheduled to be somewhere else. And so then Bob becomes elevated, and Bob becomes the person who's orchestrating and manipulating and gaslighting. And it's easier for people to go along to get along because they don't want to be the singled out. They don't want to be the, whistleblower, because most people can't handle that pressure. And they're also using Bob to play the long game. And so it's very, very problematic. And so bystanders will then begin to engage in bullying themselves because they believe you deserve it, because they have my side bias, because Bob is feeding them a line of bull, and they're finding things in their environment to confirm it. And the other thing that that recipients sometimes do is when they become defensive, okay, they too can get into this game of, cat and mouse, kind of the back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And so it's because then you're vested in your role as a recipient. You find that yourself, that who you are in that environment is attached to what they are doing to you. And so then what happens is these roles become solidified in the culture. The cultural norms become that of bullying. So it is expected and even rewarded when you have yelling and stuff going on in meetings. You find that the people who are getting promoted is not Jan, who's doing her job and trying to stop bullying. It's, Barb and Brenda, or whoever, Steve, who's ever in the environment that's working alongside Bob, being manipulated, so to speak. They're the ones that are getting promoted. So then people cycle out of the work environment. Okay, new people cycle in, and those norms are continued, right? People are socialized into bully culture and what their role is as a bystander. Oftentimes people cycle in as a bystander, right? And so very often then they learn that what is expected is bullying. The other thing that often happens too, and this is a problem for HR, is they say, oh, we have this lovely mission and our values are respect and we treat people with respect and dignity. And that's what they spew, respect and dignity, respect and dignity. However, then what they do is then they get my side bias, they become involved in groupthink, and then they're alienating the very person who's the one who is victimized, right? And then that person becomes even more alienated, becomes even more problematic. And so there's all these disconnects, and it's all these systematic and complex problems that lead to the normalized negativity. And then what happens when it becomes embedded into your culture, right? The weeds, if you think of it as a garden, that is, weeds are just, are taking over the garden. What happens then is if you pluck Bob the bully out of that role and Bob leaves, what happens is somebody else rolls over, there's role shifts, and somebody else becomes a bully. And oftentimes that could be a bystander, right? Or even a new person coming in could be elevated to that role of bully. And so it doesn't take long for those roles to become solidified. And then you have a workplace that has bully culture. And it becomes much more problematic when it's embedded into your norms to get bullying and even toxicity out of your organization. That's why early intervention and putting those things to bed as soon as you can is really, really important. Okay. And so next week we're going to talk about really how people become that bully, right? How do you become that bully? And I hate to I'll just give you a small clue. It is not people who have high conflict personalities necessarily, or that are toxic people. It's much more difficult and problematic than that is. So anyway, well, I don't know if you heard my phone ring, but I think that was my landlord trying to ask me a couple questions. So I hope you're doing well. Again, I'll put the link for my shop down below, and also the link that you can go directly and get that leadership book, which is, again, really good for, for an upcoming leader, but it's really good for leaders where there's workplace bullying, because it's not just a book that says, hey, you need to learn those skills. It's really a book that helps you assess your own leadership skills and build on those already good skills you have that can be better to deal with workplace bullying. So anyway, as always, thank you so much, and I will see you next week.